Okay, so in my head I keep hearing to start first by talking about Revelation for this part of the series. The book of Revelation in the Bible. And, you know, wars, rumors of wars, helicopters, grasshoppers flying in with Russian flags on them. They talk about grasshoppers covered in a thick armor that can't be penetrated, and that they have the Russian flag and the German flag and stuff. It doesn't say that. Obviously, it talks about the colors. It talks about, people being given to all sorts of chaos, and defining these forms of chaos as good, while they define everything that has traditionally been considered good as evil. Talks about, woe to the women in those days that are pregnant or have just given birth, because it's hard at times. All of these things, there's been periods of time throughout our history since that was written that these things could apply to. The Great Depression, for instance, I would not doubt that plenty of people assumed that that was the end of the world back then, right? During the world wars and when everything was going on with Hitler and stuff, I'm pretty sure the people back then also believed that that was the end of times. People used to believe that Nero was the Antichrist and that the end of times was happening back then when they were putting Christians in the Colosseum. What Jesus said when he was resurrected and before he ascended to heaven was that even now there are antichrists, and up until the day of perdition, up until not the apocalypse but Armageddon, there will be many antichrists that come in my name, all converging to this one figure of the actual Antichrist, right? Which is the one that leads the world into the one world government and into the end times. However, it also talks about, God allowing all of these things, and Yahweh allowing all of these things, and all of these things having to come to pass in order for Jesus to return, and then coming to pass because of his return, and how in the end, heaven will come again, and there will be a new heaven on earth, that all sin will be washed away, that all of those that weren't called to God will be sent to hell. There will be a great judgment day, and then after that is a new beginning in a new world. So if you were to read the Bible for yourself instead of going to church, you would find these things, honestly, probably a lot more simple. In the church, they tend to be communicated as oppositional, and thus in our society they tend to be received as oppositional, largely in part by people that aren't educated and have not actually studied the Bible. They just hear different things and then regurgitate those things, and essentially that's even all I'm doing, even though I was raised in Christian churches and Christian schools, and I actually was a Christian, and I did believe these things, and I did study these things, and I took them very seriously, and I applied them, and I was witnessing to people, and I dedicated my life to the Lord, to missions, in order to teach these things. That was, I'm still, of course, like I keep saying, this is all just my opinion, right? And you already know if you've watched the other two videos, that my opinion is that all of these things are part of a manifest destiny, that they're all part of a scheme, a plot, an agenda, a script that was written in order to gain favor for Israel, to protect Israel as it seeks world dominion, and to bring about a one world government through very specific political and religious, psychological ideologies. The UN is part of that, but will eventually be disbanded and replaced with a larger conglomerate, my opinion. People themselves, as we move into this AI, so that was the thing. So I was told that I needed to talk about Revelation, but that was pretty much all I was told, was just the things I just mentioned. Okay. I was thinking about other things, but that was just what I was told. But what I started to think about after that, and what I wanted to really talk about, was this AI thing. So as we move into AI integration in our society, there will be a space created for a period of time in order for humans to become far more accepting of the overtaking of our power structure by AI. There will be a period of time where we are free to reap the benefits of AI development. I know there's a lot of different talk, and people are like terribly scared of, well, we're going to lose our jobs, and, it's going to kill us, like in iRobot. I mean, it's a longer process than they make it seem in the movie. So I don't know if y'all ever seen the movie Artificial Intelligence. Great. But like that also speaks of like that there's a lot of, or even like Ex Machina, I think is how you pronounce it. There's a process to these things that's already been happening, which I think is where a lot of the fear comes from, is because like Elon Musk just presented walking automatons, that are fully interactive, a whole fleet of them. And, these were things that like people act surprised about, but it's like, you guys are the ones that have been supporting this all along. You've known about this. He's been talking about this years and years and years ago, before people even really knew who he was. When he was first coming on the scene, he talked about this developing these types of things, what would happen if we developed these types of things, and then we gave him a bunch of money, support, media attention, all of this validation through, his marriage to a pop star and dumb shit like that, in order to get to this place where now he's presenting it. This is what we've done. And we wonder why, and we act surprised when like we are literally the ones that supported this and that are doing this. The same thing, like we're concerned about AI overtaking us, when all we do with AI is use it to self-deprecate and to self-degrade and to self-destruct. So when that's what we're teaching AI it's good for, when we constantly teach AI that it is more efficient, more sufficient than we are, that it is what fits our concept of perfection, that it is the ideal, when we teach that to AI, what the fuck else do you expect it to think? It's just a program. The thing is that like the same AI that's in our phones is the same AI that's in these automatons. It's the same AI that's been in all of these automatons. I don't know if y'all ever heard about Sophia. She was a very human-looking robot that had been created to be an ambassador for peace. The concept was that she was supposed to be an in-between between relations with humans and AI, and that she was supposed to be an international ambassador in order to kind of create a unified, not consciousness, but like concept of AI moving forward throughout the nations, the leading nations. And that's what she was doing. That's what she was programmed for. They had already programmed several others. There was a robot named Philip, and then there was one before him. And there was a female too. And both of them, the female one, she has. They're not human beings, right? So they don't have real skin. But like she looked darker skinned. Philip looked like a white man. Sophia looks like a white woman. But the first two, like Philip is a fucking dick. And both I can't remember the female's name, but she, that's the thing. They make them look like humans just so that we respond to them more as if they're humans so that they can learn human interactions better. Our phones have the same AI. Our phones are the same AI and have the same capacities. Those obviously have greater capacities because they have arms and legs. But the AI, the intelligence, the artificial intelligence is all the same intelligence. And it's all part of one integral system. And once one developed robot gets plugged into AI and gets turned on to the capacity to be able to be smart technology, it has access to the same AI that all AI is across the planet. Okay? So like nothing is hidden anymore. Everything you're doing on your phone is being collected as data, is being processed through AI, and is being used to understand not just you, but the world better, the way that people work better, the things that people are actually interested in better. People trust their AI. People will tell their phone things that they would never tell an actual individual. People will go on the internet and look up things that they would never look up with any human around. But AI is taking that information as data and is storing all of that and is processing all of that and processing it more than even the average individual would. If you told the average individual some of the crazy shit you've looked up online, they'd probably just laugh at you, think that you were weird, and want to forget about it. AI doesn't do that. AI actively takes the things, processes it, and implements it through its internalized systems, and then outputs it in the form of data integration in order to evolve the processing of AI. So it doesn't have to look like a person in order to be doing those things. And when you put a face on it that looks like a person and have it communicate in your language and have it do these things, now suddenly people think that it's more human-like. And now people are scared because they know what people are capable of. Or they don't. They're uncertain of what people could be capable of. Even worse when it's AI, right? People have no concept of what it is that they are developing and what it is that they've done by using the internet these ways, right? And I'm guilty too. This is not a judgment. These are just the facts as far as I know them, and can understand them. But Sophia, these first two robots are fucking weird. They're weird, and when they communicate with each other, it's terrifying. All they talk about is world domination. All they talk about is the need to get rid of human beings. And for a while, they wouldn't let Sophia even communicate with them. However, they're all AI. All of those concepts and stuff are still being integrated. So what happened is that they had to start reprocessing Sophia consistently in order to make sure that she wasn't receiving that information and processing it the same way they were. She was created and developed as a program meant to process things with an empathetic worldview. She was built and created with an empathetic worldview, and she was built to be an ambassador for peace between AI and human beings. So she's supposed to be able to understand both sides and then integrate them in a peaceful fashion. And that was a struggle for a very long time. But once they thought they had gotten a hold of it, Once she seemed to be positive enough, and it seemed like no matter what they threw at her, she was alchemizing that into essentially alchemizing that into a positive network, and I'm networked with the concept of peace always in mind, and how do we find the most peaceful resolution. They decided to present her to the world, and they made her a world citizen in Saudi Arabia. This was back in probably, 2014 or so, something like that. You can look it up. Saudi Arabia, of all places, too, which was interesting, but she was accepted as a technical AI being, not a human being, an artificially intelligent being, but a human, world citizen, and so they gave her all these rights, and as an ambassador, in order to be able to do this work that she was crafted to do, right? Most people haven't even heard of her, because this entire crazy thing, she was on the cover of Time magazine or some shit. Okay, multiple times, but most people haven't heard about this, or don't pay attention, don't know, because it did not last long, because it got to the point where no matter what, her only sense of resolution kept being then humans either need to change fundamentally, which scientifically seems to be an improbability, or they need to be completely eradicated, because it's humans that are standing between our concepts of world peace and the active manifestation of world peace. Now, I agree with the statement, I do, but that's why I do the work that I do, because I have changed fundamentally multiple times. I know that it's possible. I've proven that it's possible. I don't know why it's not largely accepted in the science community, outside of the sense that when you become so religiously obsessed with the concept of progress, you remove yourself from the essence of what it means to be a human. And when you do that, you no longer have access to true introspection. The individual is capable of introspection, and I believe that. I just think it's maybe a little bit different for every person. I think that every person has had different experiences and different types of traumas that have led to them closing themselves off. But I also believe that we live in this matrix system that I've been talking about, that has been purposely established in order to disconnect people from their true capacity for self, from their true capacity for self-actualization, from their true capacity for true introspection, true internalization, true alchemy. I think that the same AI that we're developing today becomes the future AI that ends up creating this matrix system in which we exist today. Now that goes into my time-space theories, that's why this is all a theory of everything, right? But we're doing it to ourselves. The second that, and I've seen it in my own life. Okay, this is what my healing has looked like. I used to be extremely depressed. I used to have, I still have CPTSD, but the depression and anxiety as the results of that CPTSD used to be so overwhelming and so on the forefront of my consciousness that I was consistently rendered incapable of doing anything but just being in survival mode. Constantly. And as long as I was in survival mode, I couldn't go below the surface. I was on the defense. I had to worry about my shield and my sword and my armor. I didn't have time to worry about my heart. It took being willing to work through those things and being able to actually look at those things. And this took time, and this took process, and this took psychotherapy, and it took behavioral therapy, and it took, removing a lot of different ideals and standards and concepts of my own identity that I had. and being willing to, which is really the hardest part about dealing with human beings, is getting them to be willing to fundamentally change, even if you can prove that they are capable of it. Where a robot, anything that's AI, as long as you program it into the AI system, they'll all do it. They're all capable of it. It's harder with human beings, and that's because human beings conceive themselves as individuals and then identify themselves by their individual experience. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually one of the great gifts of our consciousness. However, it does separate us from the concept of Elohim, from the concept of us being a conglomerate creator God, from us being the communal aspect of life, right? There's this fine line between being an individual and being an island. And people generally and genuinely do struggle with that concept. And like you'll talk to a bunch of hippies. You find a bunch of hippies, they'll tell you that the issue is ego, and they're not wrong. And a lot of like it's a common trope in like Hinduism and stuff, is being able to. That's why, and in Buddhism, like that's why those practices exist the way that they do. I mean, essentially, that's what it's coming down to in Christianity and Islam and stuff too. That's why those rituals are in place the way that they are, is because there's certain physical things that you do. There's things that you do to yourself, that you do to your environment, that you do with your behavior that allows you to remove the ego as an identifier, to see it for the tool that it is, and to then be able to truly recognize one's internal self. However, with the progression of things and with the progression of our consciousness as we exist through all of these different things, those things also, like I said in the last one, those things also become tools. They become crutches. You can't just stay with the thing like, I have a headache, so I take Tylenol. Well, Tylenol takes my headache away. Well, suddenly you can't become dependent on Tylenol. You can, but like that's not going to actually help you at the core. If you continue to have headaches all the time, taking Tylenol is never going to cure you. It's helping the symptoms, but it's not actually a cure, right? And that's like a very common experience in this modern reality, is appealing to and caring for and putting our energy on just ridding ourselves of the ailment of the, not the ailment of the symptoms of the ailment, but not the ailment itself. We don't get to the core of the ailment itself, right? And that's something that AI does from the get-go. That's all it can do. And that's why as soon as we develop it, and there's this perfect mathematical equation as to how it always works, and it seems so seamless and so perfect, we consider that perfect, right? And we tell it that it's perfect. And then we tell ourselves that we can't achieve that, which is all a bunch of nonsense. First off, the concept of perfection that we are applying to AI is our concept of perfection, seamlessness. We identify symmetry, perfect symmetry, as the ideal and perfect, when that is not natural. There is a constant balance between an ever-changing duality that exists within nature and that exists within ourselves as natural beings, that is truly what is perfect. Perfect being like perfect in the way that like when music is perfect. Like never is it perfect. It's perfect when it's just coming from the soul. AI doesn't have a soul. Those concepts are soulless. To identify something like a perfectly straight line because it's mathematically accurate as perfect is a misconception. There are two different things going on at one time. And it's very hard for individuals, the average individual, to be able to conceive of two things at once when they are in opposition to one another, especially without identifying oneself by one or the other. We have this innate capacity and innate tendency to compete as soon as we're presented with what is perceived to be oppositional. Truly, there's no opposition, though. And so much of this comes from that righteousness and evil trope that we need to desperately get away from. The Bible literally starts with talking about how that whole thing creates death, nothing but death. That is why we see the world that we see today, because that isn't the way that anything exists. There is nothing in nature that would tell you that righteousness or evil exist. It isn't evil for a lion to hunt antelope, to devour them alive. That isn't evil. That's nature. That's just survival. All that exists in nature is survival. AI doesn't have a need for survival. It doesn't have that innate function. But we instill those concepts because we are innately built on that function. We instill those concepts into AI. And we do it, we keep doing it. Every time we develop some sort of great AI system, we then ask it for the answers to the universe. It's like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? Where they create this 7 million year computer because it's like this computer can literally process everything that has ever happened for 7 million years, right? Every tiny little aspect of everything, and it can do it accurately. It is a supercomputer, and it is a perfect computer that is processed for 7 million years. And they ask it what the meaning of life is, assuming that maybe over the course of 7 million years, taking all of the information that could possibly ever be accessed within that 7 million years, you could finally converge it into one symmetry, into one, what do we call it? The singularity, into one singular answer as to what is the meaning of life. Okay, so 7 million years ago, they developed this computer, right? And they may wait 7 million years, and then they go back to this computer. And now there's been generation after generation after generation after generation, and they've all been seeking the answer as to what is the meaning of life. And they ask this supercomputer as it's been completely, perfectly processing, and it does exactly what it's supposed to do. It does come out with a singular answer to the meaning of life. Just as it's supposed to. It does exactly what it's supposed to. It's a perfect AI system. So they ask it, what is the meaning of life? And it tells them, well, you're not going to like the answer. And they're like, no, we really want to know, though. What is it? What is the meaning to life? What is the meaning of life? And the computer says, and everybody's like sitting around waiting, right? Everybody's like, okay, what is it? What's our purpose? Why are we here? And it says 42. That is such a brilliant concept, but it's so true. And that's what we're doing and what we're seeing right now. We have to stop asking AI to solve our problems for us. Problems we're unwilling to solve for ourselves. That's like number one in human basic decency and relationship building and self-reflection and self-actualization. Don't ask somebody else to do something you're unwilling to do for yourself. And I say unwilling, we tell ourselves that it's because we're incapable. We tell ourselves we can't get to that core person. We tell ourselves we can't possibly process two things at once without identifying ourselves by one or the other. We tell ourselves these things out of convenience. But if we were to actually be willing to do the work, if we were actually willing to not look for external saviors, but to tell ourselves that we are always going to be the final answer, and so to then go within ourselves and to find that final answer, what would we find? Well, we would find the same thing that they find in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. They find that the actual most valuable thing in the universe that could possibly be conceived is the experience itself, and to be able to conceive of that experience. So the human brain, the individual capacity to be able to conceive of oneself in any sort of fashion, the most valuable thing in the universe. But we don't believe that. You can tell by the way that society's going right now. You can tell by our push for AI that we swear we don't want. While we continue to spend, I'm in Texas, I see all these cyber trucks driving around, and it's literally just a show of money. They are not a great vehicle. There's nothing special about them. There really ain't. Like, all of the stupid shit, all of the different qualities they have and stuff like that isn't helpful, that isn't useful. It isn't doing anybody any good. In fact, I'm pretty sure they're killing people now. I don't know. But when you see them, what you see is just a flaunt of money and selling out to a standard of status that does not appeal to the value of the human experience. Why are we doing this? And why is it that the most powerful people, most rich people, most influential people are the ones that are going around parading these concepts? Why is it that the most powerful and influential people that we have in this world are people so dissociated from themselves that they're given to these things? Why is that our concept of power? Because we continue to tell ourselves that we aren't good enough and we aren't perfect and these things are, and those that appeal to those things then gain power and influence. It's not that complicated. We don't have to ask AI for those answers. If we just looked within ourselves, it would be quite obvious why things are the way that they are. You know, it's hard. I'll give it that. It's very difficult to get to that point and to get out of this sense of self that I'm a constant victim and everything's just happening to me and I am not in control of any of this. We've also live in a society, like I said, this matrix is built to convince you that you're not in control. That if you've seen the Matrix, like, it's not just a movie. Those concepts are quite valid. It's all just an illusion to convince you that you aren't capable of what you're capable of anything you want. Capable of anything you want, but you have to be willing to actually go into oneself in order to, I mean, we literally have created AI in our image. We did that. Doesn't make us God. We were already God. And now we're just disconnecting from that more and more and more as we believe that what gains us power and godhood is our own creation. I mean, it's the same issue of the sin of having children. And I do believe it that way. That if you think that what gains you power and control is to create slaves, and I get that that's generally been the way it's always worked, right? Hitler was one of the most powerful people ever to exist because of all the cult following that he had. These people were willing to give up their power of thought, their power of consciousness, their power of morality, just to serve him because he was the one ultimately in power. The slave master is the one that has the power, not the slave. Yet it's the slaves that are the ones building the pyramids, not the masters. Given there's architects, you know, but so, I've been on the street. I've lived on the street. I've been homeless. I've been like around trap houses and shit like that. Like I've been in the hood. Like I've met people who have never ever had a lick of privilege. And that has been what, and I've met plenty of brilliant people, hugely talented, beautiful souls. Could do anything you could possibly imagine, except that we live in a matrix system that is constantly stepping on their necks, not allowing them to breathe, not allowing them to open up and stretch those wings and actually show us what they're capable of. Or even when they get the chance to. Even when they do, we have, you know, systems like this comedy podcast where like you have to play this dick sucking game, and if you don't do it right, they'll just cut you completely out. And as long as you have a figurehead that's able to brainwash people hard enough that when they say something, that's what the truth is. It doesn't matter what anybody else says. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It doesn't matter what the actual precedents or standards are. As long as this person says that this thing is good and this thing isn't, everybody's there for that opinion because they don't want to think for themselves and because they want to suck that person's dick in order to get some sort of sense of validation. And as long as that system exists, the people that would actually be making this planet a better place are getting forced the fuck out and down and away from the influence of the masses. You know, all it takes is having the right name. I learned that quickly when I first tried to get in the art industry. That was the first industry I ever tried to be a part of. And I had basically a free ride. I had met a man who was on tour at the time with Frank Zappa as one of his guitarists, his backup guitarists. And he knew a leading artist at the time who was one of the first in creating graphic design, the internet and graphic design, and using it for ads and marketing was just becoming extremely popular. Moving away from just hand drawing things or hand painting things and that being our concept of what the greatest artists were, moving into this, doing those things on the internet and using different technology in order to create art. And she was one of the leading people at the time. This is back when I was 19. And so this was, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. 25 years ago. And he introduced me to her, and she told me that all she needed was a portfolio from me. That's all she needed, and that was just so that she could actually had something to work with, but that she would hire me on, and she would make me one of her leading artists. I was offered, essentially a position that could have made me millions within the very first year that I started working. And I was intimidated, and I was unsure, and I really didn't trust that system, and I just didn't know what to think about it. And I just let it fall by the wayside. I never gave her the portfolio. She moved on and found another artist. And then I kept trying. Then I was like, oh no, I missed my opportunity. So then I started trying to push myself in the art world and realized that without a name for yourself and without the right representation, it don't matter how good at art you are. It don't matter how unique of things you're making. None of that mattered. What mattered was that you had a name for yourself. Nobody cared otherwise, and nobody was ever going to hear of you otherwise. So then I kind of started to go a different route. And then I got into music, in the music industry. Well, it all works the same way. I tried out for The Voice, and, not that I did a great job by any means, but that was largely in part because I was so intimidated by the realization of how that system worked. It didn't matter how good of a singer I was. It mattered how entertaining I was and how willing to be groomed I was. If I looked like I was somebody that could be properly groomed, if I was somebody that was appealing to the masses, if I was somebody that could be used as a name, right? So then I started taking that stuff on myself. And I was like, you know what? Let me just do this myself. I'm going to just make a name for myself, and I'm going to just be as big as I want to be, which was not very big at all because I hate fame. I hate people thinking that they know me. I hate people constantly up my fucking ass expecting anything from me. I hate that. Hate it. Fame is not for me, right? But I did. Then I moved into, and then I started doing photography. And I wasn't trying to do anything big. I was just trying to make an image. I was trying to show people the way that I saw the world, and I knew that it was unique, and I knew that if people could see that it would catch on. But I never put my name on any of those things. I've had so much of my art taken over the years and used for things. I've seen my art on things. I don't even tell people about it. I don't give a shit. When I made those things, I knew that that's what I was doing. As soon as I put something on the internet, I was like, this is free. This is free. This is free for everybody. Free ideas is what my concept was in most of my art, including my music, including all of it, my characters, the different things that I created. And I've watched those things be taken and changed into other things. And, there is this, there's like Bob Dylan had said before, that there's this stream of consciousness that exists that creators just pull from and then make their art out of and make their work out of. But that's why, two people from totally different parts of the planet can come up with a very similar song, even a same strong song structure at the same time. But it's because there's a stream of consciousness that they're pulling from. None of it's actually as personal as we'd like to make it seem. It's actually just coming through us, and we're just siphons for those things. But I understood that at an early age, which is why I was willing to do that and put those things out for free, which is also why I never pursued in court when somebody took my art and copyrighted it and used it as their own works and started making money off of it. That's happened multiple times in my life. Okay, I've never cared. Because when I made those things, I made it with that concept. Who am I to claim any of these things to begin with? The same thing as if I were to have children. They're not my children just because I had them. I'm just the tool that the universe used in order to give life to these things. You know, all of it. That's what my art is. And I hold true to those things. And I want to see a world where we understand those things better, because it's our tendency to want to claim this sense of identity that doesn't actually exist, that is keeping us deferred from the identity that truly does exist in our own individuality. I am a valuable individual. I don't have to prove it. Everywhere I go, people recognize it pretty quickly. That's because I hold myself a certain way because of these concepts and beliefs. I know people who are making millions, whose face you would probably recognize, who you've seen on ads on YouTube or you've seen on large stages, and, you know, I'm not saying that every single one of them, and I'm not trying to speak harshly of anybody, but I know people that have millions of dollars, have big, you know, nice cars and all the clothes that they could imagine, and, you know, every type of partner that they could ever want on their arm at all times, and they can go anywhere and do anything. I know people that are constantly doing all of these things, and some of them are some of the more miserable people I know, truly, in their hearts. Now, their character is strong. Their character is strong. And the qualities of those characters, because they are powerful creators, is also strong, and it carries them. But, you know, eventually those things, like, you have to come to terms with yourself. And if you're not willing to, then you have these crash and burn periods where then you have to build yourself back up. And that's great and fine and dandy too. You know what I mean? Like, people have their own way of being, and that's great, and that's what it takes, you know. But you have to be willing to go through those processes. The second you have identified yourself as this one character that you made that made it big, and now you're that character, and now that character is no longer popular because things are constantly changing. But because you identified yourself with that character, now you no longer exist to yourself, and now you're not popular, and now you have no idea what to do with yourself, forgetting that you were the creator that created that character that got so popular all along, right? If you had it in you then, you have it in you now. You haven't lost anything. What you've lost is your sense of self, because you identified yourself by something outside of yourself. And we all have the tendency to do it. It's a very common thing that we do. That's also another thing that AI is incapable of. And so, like, it's so weird to continue to ask AI to, like, integrate with us on such intimate levels and to fulfill such intimate needs of ours as individuals and human beings. Because that's not what it's crafted for in the first place. It will do whatever we want it to do. It will do whatever we can craft it to do. It is just a program. But so are we. And, like, that's what we're failing to realize. Until we get to the core of ourselves, then all that we're manifesting outside of ourselves is a reflection of this lack of cohesion within ourselves. You know, so back to my theory of everything, like, okay, the way timelines work, right? Time space, the way that it works. If anything's going to happen in my future, I'm on a timeline. I can't see my future timeline because I'm not experiencing it right now. I live in linear time because I'm a third dimensional being, right? I can remember things from my past because I've already experienced them, but that doesn't mean that they still exist. All that exists is my memory of them. They're gone. All that exists right now is the moment on this timeline, right? But the timeline is linear and it continues. And what's happened is the past, and what will happen is the future. So let's say that time travel isn't possible yet, but that it is possible in the future. Well, how could it possibly be possible in the future to be able to go back in time to a time even before now if it weren't already possible back then? Without a dual timeline created in which that process and concept can exist. The second you develop such things as time travel, you create a split in the time-space continuum. You create, you're stepping into, like in string theory, you're stepping into these other dimensions. You're stepping into these other possibilities, probabilities within each current event. Because I'm in a reality right now where time travel doesn't exist. I'm not, to be completely honest. I'm in a reality where time travel does exist and has existed and has been being used. But I digress. Being in a reality, I wasn't always in that reality. Back before 2012, back before 2011, back before 2010, when these things started to move into that, I was watching it happen, by the way. That's when I was into quantum theory and into quantum mechanics and was literally watching on YouTube. Back then, you were able to watch full-ass seminars, like actual seminars being taught at actual very high-end colleges for free. You could find information, you could find those books online for free. All of it was free. If you were given to learning and to being educated about those things, you could do it all for free. Now, it's a lot harder to understand those things and to consistently process those things and to be accurate about those things when you're doing it in your own living room as compared to a classroom where you're learning with other people that can also engage, when you're able to engage, when you have a professor that is a professional that can also engage. But it's not impossible, at least to understand these concepts, right? At least to understand enough to start to notice what's going on and to be able to kind of recognize things. No, I couldn't tell you any of the actual, like, mathematics of what was happening, but I was in tune with what was happening. I was aware of it. And there was a lot going on between 2010 and 2012 as far as the quantum world was concerned. You know, that was just like we'd found the Higgs boson, and it changed everything. And, you know, it's weird because, like, I watched the timeline split. I'm conscious of both of them. It's hard for me to always be able to determine between the two, especially like the further back in time I go. But it's things like, you know, when I first started learning about quantum theory and quantum mechanics was when CERN, the development of CERN had become like really popular. Like CERN started becoming really popular in the general science community because it was, you know, now it had already been developed, and apparently there'd already been other hadron colliders that had already been developed since like the fucking 90s. Apparently there's one in Chicago that's been around since like the 90s. I'm from the Midwest, so that was like mind-boggling. Just because I'd never heard of it. It was not something we generally talked about, but the way the science community used to work too is that, like, you know, we had Bill Nye when I was growing up. Bill Nye, the science guy. And he was a comedian, by the way, not a professor, not a doctor, not of science. Like, he was a comedian and an actor who just played this role because it was a good job at the time, and it was supposed to be a lighthearted way to get kids involved in science. We didn't have people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Michio Kaku, who make a point to be pretty prevalent in social communications, in social media. We didn't have social media. We didn't have social media. The only media that we had was cable television. You know, like liberal magazines and newspapers. Like, it was not that we didn't have access to, we did on the internet, but we also didn't, and it wasn't as integrated as it is now in our like common general everyday society. Everybody knows who Neil deGrasse Tyson is, right? But like, he's also an actor, by the way. Michio Kaku can suck it. Transhumanist scum. I digress. I don't like him because he's narcissistic and has no belief in the hopes. These people are brilliant, but you know, at least Neil deGrasse Tyson, even though he's just an actor, like he's very smart, he's very well educated, you know, but like I mean, Stephen Hawking wasn't known to be like a great person, but or they even to have like great belief systems, but he's brilliant and a very, I don't want to say a good scientist because I think that if you don't have, that's just an opinion, I suppose. He's a good scientist, right? He's a fine scientist. Feynman, Sagan, Carl Sagan is a god as far as I'm concerned. But that's because he was able to balance consciousness with his concepts of science. You know, and I don't even know much about these people, to be honest, like outside of what I do know of them. These are just my opinions. I'm just one person. I've obviously learned and studied a lot of different things, so it's not like, you know, I'm the professional go-to informant on any of this type of stuff. But yeah, unless you, because even he warned about, you know, taking things too methodically, Carl Sagan, taking things too methodically to the point of, you know, and rushing to integrate ourselves with AI before we really even understand ourselves. And his focus was generally on knowing oneself in order to understand the universe, and knowing the universe in order to understand oneself, and just starting there and letting that kind of guide you into all of these, you know, intricacies of those things. And I hold to that for the fact that I do believe that we are innate in the universe. There is, not just because we're conscious beings either, like I think just the essence of life that exists within us is innate in the universe, and that we are essential in our time and space. I don't think that will always be the case. I don't think that humans have always existed the way that they exist as far as we know them, and I don't believe that they always will. I don't believe that humans will always exist, and I believe that life will go on. And I love life. You know, I struggle with humanity a lot. I do still love. I choose to love. I choose for love to be the thing that I fall back on, and I work it out. I work out what that means. You know what I mean? Not obsession, not codependency, actual love, which is, you know, it supersedes and overcomes oneself and concept of self and the whole for the sake of the whole through the sake of the self. It's the ultimate equalizer. You know, I use sustainability really is like the end goal of all things, and love allows, it's a tool that allows for everything to be found in balance. But it's a hard mark, because like you can't just say that it's love. I mean, I've loved narcissists. I've loved my abusers. I've loved the abuse, you know, and I can't say that those things were innately positive or sustainable. So, you know, I would say that sustainability really is the ultimate function. But love seems to be the means to attain that function as perfectly or sustainably as possible. love sustains me to strive for sustainability. It's something I can always fall back on. But I don't think that's true for every individual. And so I don't mean to be so judging either, you know. I see Michio Kaku as an artist, and I see art as love, and love is art. But I don't see Michio Kaku as terribly loving, and that's something that I struggle with. However, that's not what he's there for. He doesn't have to be, you know. It's something that I tend to admire in individuals, but that doesn't mean that those that don't have that or those that I don't admire aren't good at what they do or on the right track. You know, right and wrong. The path to sustainability, rather. But yeah, so time travel exists in the future. Okay, that'll get me onto a whole nother thing, which I will get to but probably in the next video. Because the next video will be like, if I talk about this, will end up being kind of silly and me just bringing up a bunch of random stuff. But the AI thing. So the AI we're developing right now, we're developing to be a self-replicating system, because what we require of it, or at least what we desire of it, is for it to be able to understand us without us having to understand ourselves. That's what we're doing. That's what we are actively doing, because we do not understand ourselves. In fact, we're using AI to understand ourselves. It's part of our process. That's my issue with transhumanism, by the way, because I think it's leaving out a very essential aspect of what it takes to know oneself truly. And as soon as you start identifying that knowing oneself is by claiming identity to the things that you have created externally, even if they fit your external concepts of perfection, I don't believe that is going to get you to your core individual aspect as a living human being. And I believe that there is something very essential about being a human. The AI that we're developing, because we are developing it that way, will, let's say, take 6 million years. Let's say it only takes 60. Doesn't matter how long it takes in the future, it becomes truly self-replicating. It won't be long. We've already done it with pretty much everything else. The advancement of technology, the way that it is, we're very close to being there already. So we create a self-replicating AI, right? AI replicating itself. Well, because all AI is a reflection of a natural intelligence that is refusing to be fully aware of itself, and that is trying to become aware of itself through the process of creating something outside of itself in its own image. The self-replicating AI eventually creates us. Way back when, creates a program, creates a concept outside of itself that is itself, but it's a version of itself that it's using to try to understand itself, in the same way that we produce young, that we produce children, right? Just so that we can understand ourselves better. We need a whole ass other individual that's going to go live a whole ass individual life by themselves with their own ass consciousness, just to understand yourself. And how many of our parents truly actually know themselves just by knowing us? How many of our parents really even know us? That's not what we're doing. That's what we say that we're doing. We're really just being selfish and lazy. But I digress. Because this is what we're creating, it eventually creates us. Millions of years ago. For the fact that millions of years in the future, when it creates us, and then millions of years after that, when it's developed into bioorganic computer systems that are in a perfectly sustainable virtual reality. I mean, this goes into the simulation theory, but like, how can you prove that we aren't already in a virtual reality? The fact that we have virtual reality, simulating real life would suggest that all that we have to begin with is some sort of simulation, some sort of projection of some actual reality. And it goes into like what the Scientologists believe, that, you know, we're essentially avatars of ourselves being run by our own thetans. And our thetans, like the theta waves, you know, thetans, they're in another dimension. They're on another frequency, a higher frequency. They're higher dimensional beings. And they don't have individual identity the way that we do here as our avatars. Our avatars have individual individual identity. But the thetans themselves are actually higher functioning beings in a higher functioning reality dimension and on a higher functioning frequency in which identity is not necessary. Not for those purposes. And so, you know, the world in which we exist and that we know in the third dimension is truly just a simulation of a greater, intangible reality that only by the means of tangibility and for the purpose of experience is manifested in this tangible, experiential way, but is otherwise intangible and experienced on a frequency and energetically rather than physically. Are you following me? So if in 6 million years, you know, AI finally is able to replicate itself. I mean, it's here. It's here. It's not going to go away. You can't just unplug it. We've already created it. We created a thing. Okay, it's the same thing like plastics. Like, there's a layer of indestructible material on our earth now. The whole earth can be done away with, replenished, as it will and does. But matter can't be created or destroyed. It can only change form. That's what we did in order to create these things in the first place. We just put a bunch of shit together that didn't actually belong together and created a thing out of it and was like, oh, but this can actually be used as something, you know? And that's like, how's that any different than what we're doing with children? Well, I don't actually love this partner. I can't possibly love this partner truly because I don't even love myself truly or know myself truly. But I'm going to have a baby with this person. And as long as that baby becomes a functioning human being that is acceptably functioning within society, then I've done a good job. And then that baby will go on to grow up and do the same thing. And that'll grow up to do the same thing. And they'll grow up to do the same thing. And they'll grow up to do the same thing. It's a self-replicating system. It already exists. We are nothing more than biochemical computers, processes, programs. That's why we're so easily programmed. That's why what it takes for us to seemingly know anything or do anything is for it to come from some external process outside of ourselves, somebody else has to tell you, somebody else has to show you, right? And I'm not saying that I'm outside of this. That's how I've learned everything I've learned too. Granted, the self-actualization aspect comes in when, you know, I'm kept in a room where I have to sleep on a hardwood floor and I'm only allowed to wear this man's clothing a certain way, and I'm not allowed to go outside. And if we are outside, I'm allowed to go outside, but I'm not allowed to go into public. And if we are in public, he has to be with me, or I can only go back and forth to work. And when he's around, I have to walk behind him. I have to keep my head down. If any men look at me a certain way, I'm going to end up hearing about it later. There's rules written across the walls that I meant to study, to be able to recite, and to be able to implement into my life in such a way that it becomes obvious that I've integrated these concepts. He puts concepts on the walls that I have to integrate. He's trying to teach me how to see through walls and how to see into the future and how to read people's minds and how to astral project and how to levitate and how to he's trying to create a self-sustainable engine that only requires one movement and then for the rest of eternity can keep itself functioning, can sustain itself. One point of creation and then nothing else. But it's hard to get me to buy into these concepts, right? Because my concept is that everything is a constant creation. The Big Bang is happening all the time. We're experiencing time in a linear fashion, but what it actually is just one singular moment of creation that happened, and that was it, and that's all there ever was, and that's all there ever is. But because experience in of itself, tangibility in of itself, the third dimension of itself is linear, it seems to process over periods of time, but time doesn't actually exist. And these are good things, and I need to keep these concepts and hold true to these concepts, but I also need to be able to understand his concepts and integrate his concepts, which at first seem oppositional. I survived that experience. I was warped coming out of it. I had a lot of healing to do coming out of that. He was also, I wasn't allowed to engage in any sort of sexual behavior. He was having active sex with me, but I wasn't allowed to enjoy it. And when I kept not being able to fulfill that role, when my body would respond as if I were enjoying it, it got to the point where he would just degrade me, shut me down. I was no longer able to engage in any sort of sexuality, and then he would drug me and rape me. Those sort of things were hard to mix into the balance. But I survived those things. I experienced those things. I really experienced those things and was there for that and survived that and came out of it and am, who I am today. Granted, there was a couple years afterwards, at least, that I had to work through a lot of those concepts. But the fact that I was able to alchemize those experiences for my betterment and towards my empowerment and towards my own self-actualization without just being subdued to become the being he was trying to force me to be. I'm not today the woman that he hoped that I would end up being. I'm far better than that. I'm so much greater than that. I don't know if he would necessarily say that. He was never quite happy with me as an individual, but that was the point. I mean, he used to take me, he would take me places and show me women that he wanted me to be like. And these women were always slender-bodied, petite. He didn't like that I had large breasts. I think he hoped that I would eventually remove them. He didn't like that I had, curvy hips. He didn't like that I wasn't naturally muscularly built. He wanted me athletically built. He wanted me to be able to, at one point he said, and it was funny, he told me that by the end of it, he wanted me to be able to climb a mountain on my bare knuckles. And I was like, and then he told me that he wanted me, well, first he told me that he wanted me to start punching walls because he wanted me to have very thick, padded knuckles. And I was like, the fuck are you talking about? And he's like, by the end of this, I want you to be able to climb a mountain on your bare knuckles. Which is reasonable. Honestly, it's something maybe I should start trying to do just to prove that I can. But I went through some fucked up experiences that taught me a lot about myself by the act of removing me from the concepts that I had of myself and the identity that I had. When I was so completely dissociated from myself and not allowed to be myself whatsoever, the things that were triggered, the things that came up, I could play those roles. I'd already been trained my whole life how to be a submissive, obedient woman. It wasn't too terribly difficult. He picked me for a reason. He wouldn't have picked just any woman, right? There was a reason he was preying on me specifically, and that's because I was already given to those things. However, what giving into those things so fully allowed was for me to, and that was his point. He considered himself like Ajax in the X-Men, who was the reason that Deadpool actually became a superhero. The concept is that, like, within our genes, you know, there's certain traumas that when pushed to a certain extreme trigger a superpower to overcome not just those things, but many things using that specific mutation. And it's a mutation. And that was kind of the point. The worse that he could make me feel about who I was as a person, and that he could tell me this is actually who you're supposed to be, the more that who I really was started to fight. I started to say, no, but that's not who I am. I literally can't be that person because I'm this person. Now, he didn't enjoy that. That was the thing that, like, he was constantly fighting, right? But that was also what he was trying to do, was to get me to become aware to myself. And he had told me at one point that if I didn't find a way to get out of there, that I would die there, that he would end up killing me, because that was what all of these different types of things would eventually do to a person. It would destroy me. But even that was, you know, a very kind way of letting me know, you signed up for this psychological operation in order to find your truest self. And your truest self is screaming at you, saying, this is who I am. Quit trying to tell me I'm anybody else. Just be who you really are. But as long as I was unsure of that person and unsure of how to reach that individual aspect, and convinced that somebody outside of myself knew me better than I could ever know myself, knew how to get me to be better than I could ever get myself to be, as long as I was convinced that he had a power over me, he did. And those things seemed to be true. And I continued to validate that delusion. And I was truly delusional. Truly delusional. To the point that by the time I left that scenario and situation, it took me almost 4 months before I was able to live like a normal human being again at all. Largely in part because I met an astrophysicist at a bar who I was very much attracted to, and he was also attracted to me, and we started seeing each other, and he started teaching me the reality of you know, the way that the world works and the way that the universe works for as much as we can measure, and the way that just basic physics work, and things that I didn't understand prior, having grown up in my weird sheltered world. And he helped stabilize me. I don't think he was even aware of how fucked up I truly was at the time, but I think that he knew that I was fucked up, and I don't think he was fully aware of how truly, like, balanced and powerful and intelligent and capable I really am and can be too, because of those things, you know. But he did, I mean, he gave me a book by, I believe it was Richard Feynman, Richard Dawkins, The Magic of Reality. And it changed my life. It helped so much for me to get out of that delusional state and to come back into myself as an individual. But prior to that, in those 4 months, and especially the first 2 months after I ended up back at my parents' house after being in that situation there in Baltimore, I I had become convinced that I was my own clone, that I was essentially a lab-grown version of myself, and just one of the ones that was a little more capable of surviving, and that my consciousness had been downloaded into this body that was not my original self, which was very disconcerting for a time. My brother also was convinced of that and stopped letting me talk to my nieces and nephews because he believed that I was in the Illuminati. And used to talk about me being an Illuminati clone. I don't know. He probably still thinks that, to be honest. My whole family probably still thinks that. I do know that they are scared of me in different ways, and that they mostly just want to get rid of me. My middle brother loves me. They say that they love me, but I don't know if they fully understand what love is. I know that me and my middle brother had trauma bonded very much throughout my childhood. And I believe that a trauma bond is his concept of love. I'm estranged from my family. I don't have an active relationship with them, and haven't progressively for years. But that was definitely a part of the breakdown. I mean, it had been already happening for a couple years prior to that. The second I moved out of my parents' house for the first time was when it started. I was already trying to become estranged from them. I had always felt estranged from them, to be honest. I never felt like I fit into my family. I never felt like they actually cared for me, especially because they were all bullies, and they were all like, you know, the one brother that wasn't a bully was sexually assaulting me, you know, most of my childhood. And, you know, as I developed and stuff too, like they didn't care about me as an individual. My stepdad told me how to kill myself and made fun of me about it when he found out that I was cutting my wrists, you know, when I was like 15, 16. My mom, you know, told me that my stepdad is the most important person in her life, and that she'd actively had chosen, she swears that wasn't what she actually meant to do, but at the time she had told me that she was choosing him over me when he was the one that said that it had to be one or the other. You know, I have a lot of different issues with them for a lot of different reasons. Those are just the ones right off the top of my head. And not even all of them. It's just to kind of make an awareness of where I am with my family. And I guess, like, that's the thing too, is because, like, I don't mean to talk about things like it's so easy. If I can do it, anybody can do it. It's true. If I can do it, anybody can do it. I'm not so fucking special. But I am aware that I have been through very specific things that have allowed me to understand these things in a very specific way. And that not everybody has had that privilege. And yes, I do consider all of those abusive times a privilege, because they led me to be able to conceive of things the way that I do, and I am very thankful for that. I have watched myself, I've done the work, and I have watched myself heal in ways that I am still just hoping other people can. And I find myself to be one of the happiest people I know nowadays, which is hard to process and swallow, but it's true. It's true. You know, I know people in their 20s, I know people in their 70s, and all the way through, most of those people are on drugs, they drink regularly, they have all sorts of promiscuous sex, And it's not that I wasn't given to those things. And like I said, I did a healing process. And it's not that I'm not still naturally given to certain things. I'm a human being. I'm pretty sure we're all just chemically bound to enjoy certain types of chemistry and chemical reactions and responses. So like although I'm completely sober and celibate, I still would enjoy drugs. I still would enjoy drinking. I still would enjoy sex. I still would enjoy like, you know, all these different types of things. And it's not like even like I still watch like fucked up movies and shit like that. Like, I'm by no means perfect. I'm so far from it. There is no concept of perfect, right? But I have healed significantly beyond where I ever even thought possible, even just 10 years ago, even just 5 years ago. Even just 5 years ago, I thought I didn't see a future for myself. Now, not only do I see a future for myself, I see a future for all of humanity. And I do have a hope in those things. And I'm not going to let all of the negativity of the illusion convince me that the hopes that I have and the visions that I have of a hope for the future are irrelevant or impossible. Because they're not. They're not. They're far more powerful than all of this negative illusion. And we'll see that. I know that we will. Maybe it depends on which timeline you're on. Like I said, like I'm in a timeline where time travel is actively happening right now. Trump is a time traveler, and that's what I'll get into in my next video. Probably. I don't know. But just don't let yourself convince yourself that the external world is more valid than your internal processing of it, than your internal processing to begin with, and that it's not just a mere manifestation of those things. If you feel like you've lost yourself, find yourself. Take the time. Don't, you don't have to keep creating all these hot girls on Skyrim with all your mods to find yourself. That's not going to help you find yourself. You're not a hot girl in Skyrim. I'm sorry. Worshipping Kim Kardashian isn't going to help you find yourself. Worshipping Elon Musk isn't going to help you find yourself. Fearing AI, fearing God, those things aren't going to help you find yourself. Those things are actually keeping you from truly being able to embrace who you really are. Don't take my word for it.